So I don't want you to think that because they're not here, they won't hear what you're offering. It's just circumstances are what they are, that we want to organize the time a certain way, and we want to capture you while you're here with all the ideas. And I think in the early session, it really got us off to a really kind of a high level, kind of, spiritual feeling of the big ideas. And so with this session, we would really like to get a bit more practical on some of the ideas that we've been mulling over for the last few days, to think, as you heard, President Carter said, be bold, come up with ideas. What should we be doing? My friend Ben, who joined us from the UN, who was here many years ago, is here from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I'm sure that, Ben, you would love to hear ideas from our participants about what the High Commissioner should be doing and could be doing. So before we do that, I'm going to give you a moment to think about that while we watch a video. I don't know, Halima, maybe you were here. I can't remember who else was here last year. I'm not sure if anyone else was here last year, but we played a slideshow of some activists who had been killed last year. And Peter Gabriel, the artist Peter Gabriel, gave us permission to create a similar slideshow with, and thank you to Frontline, Andre Roca, and Frontline really helped us actually with this project by giving us ideas about who to feature in this video. And the song Heroes, that is a David Bowie song, was covered, a version of it was done by Peter Gabriel. And he has allowed us to use his rendition to set this slideshow about human rights activists, some who have given their lives and some who are still working. And Jimena was great and gave us some ideas for the video as well. So we're going to watch that first, just to give us some time to think about how we can go forward and work together. Brandon, if you'll play the video. Lights down.
I wish I could swim like dolphins can swim. Though nothing will keep us together, we can beat them forever and ever. How we can be heroes just for one day. How we can be heroes just for one day. I will be king, and you will be queen. Though nothing will drive us away, how we can be heroes just for one day. How we can be us just for one day. I can remember the guns shout above our heads, and we kiss as though nothing could fall. And the shame was on the other side. Oh, we can beat them forever and ever, and we can be heroes just for one day.
Thank you. It's always hard to just pick credit after. Yeah. So we'd really like to keep this conversation going if we can. And some of you really wanted to speak in the last session, and we ran out of time. We have a list of speakers, but please put up I see a few placards up. But let's think together about what we can do and how we can be in solidarity with each other. We've already found some ideas and some ways. And I think that what moved me a lot was this idea that as much as financial support is important for the work, that moral support is just as important. So there's much we can do in this regard. And I think this is where we at the Carter Center, and I really like Wassam's idea that we should help maybe be an incubator for these creative solutions here and bring groups together to talk about how we can move forward. So I'm going to start with Raja, who had her placard up quite early, and we haven't forgotten you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that, like, in 2011, Syrian people dreamed of having country which prevails rule of law and human rights principles. We called for democracy, justice, and freedom. And now, what we are calling for, and I encourage all to support us in those demands and messages, for support for the political process based on the Security Council Resolution 2254, which have the roadmap for transition in Syria and also organizing constitutional process and election process, but also support women and civil society participation in the peace process. We are not going to have a sustainable peace without having a strong woman presence and woman voices, and the same thing for civil society. But most importantly, the protection of civilians is a necessity. Like Syrian civilians have suffered from bombing and also chemical attack, but also detention, etc. So, and many other violations. So protection of civilians, especially from the bombing and detention, would be very needed. Thank you.
Raja, can I follow up with a question for you about this? What can we do to support the process of women in the peace process? I know you're meeting with our colleagues in the conflict resolution program here at the Carter Center who are very involved in Syria process. But is there something that we can do to encourage the special envoy or the UN, those who are really running the process to do more? What are they not doing to include women in the peace process?
Thanks for the question. It's very important to have officially at least, we've been calling for at least 30% participation of women in the Constitutional Committee, but also in the political process in general. And even with different mechanism that was established, we still are not close even to 20%. So it would be very important to have an organized mechanism to make sure that women are on the table and in the supporting roles as well, at least for 30%. And this is officially, but also on the supporting roles. I want to make sure that this is first, and second, I want to make sure that the civil society who are participating in the Constitutional Committee, but also in other process, within the political process, they have the support needed, the technical support, in order to be engaging effectively and making sure that we have clauses in any constitution of protection of all the people who are included, but also making sure that human rights and women's rights are preserved in any new form or any new constitution in Syria.
That's perfect. Ilham.
أوكي تمام. سوف أكمل من حيث انتهت زميلتي رجاء فيما يخص الوضع النساء في العراق وما الذي تحتاجه بالتحديد ومن خلال نشاطاتنا وعملنا في مرحلة ما بعد 2003 وكيف ممكن تكون المساعدة لنا في النشاطات. بالنسبة لنضال النساء في العراق من أجل حماية الحقوق أو الحصول على الحقوق أو منع العنف الذي يحدث أثناء النزاعات، بصراحة الذي يساعدنا كثيراً هي الآليات الدولية في تعاملنا مع الحكومة في نقاشاتنا ومفاوضاتنا. فمن أهم هذه الآليات هي قرار مجلس الأمن 1325. لكن من خلال العمل، نحن من الدول الأوائل التي وضعت خطة وطنية لتطبيق قرار 1325، لكن كانت هذه الخطة هي على الورق فقط، عملت وضعتها الحكومة لكن لم تنفذها. نعود الآن إلى فلسفة 1325 وما هي حجم الالتزام الذي يفرضه على الدول. نحن نرى أن قرار 1325 أصبح قديم نوعاً ما ولا يستجيب لحالات النزاع وما تتعرض له النساء في مناطق النزاع. يجب أن تكون هناك آليات محاسبة للمجرمين الذين اقترفوا الجرائم، خاصة في 2014 وما فعلته جماعات داعش الإرهابية، ولم تقتصر حالات العنف ضد النساء على كما يروج له الإعلام على على مجموعات داعش الإرهابية، بل قامت كل الأطراف ارتكبت العنف ضد النساء. فإذا نحتاج إلى آليات جديدة، ليس فقط أنه محاسبة وإعادة نظر بالآليات. حقيقة هذه الآليات هي مثل السلاح لدينا، نستطيع أن ندخل في مفاوضات مباشرة مع الحكومة. فنريد أكثر من إحراج، نريد أكثر من مجرد أنه طلب إلى الحكومة أن تنتبه إلى أمور معينة. فأتمنى أن يكون فتح حوار في الأمم المتحدة في مجلس الأمن للنظر بالتطورات الحاصلة في المنطقة وما يحدث للنساء والمدافعات أيضا. شكرا.
That's very helpful, and let's work together to make a letter or something specific to the various UN bodies. We have the High Commissioner representative, and the special procedures. There's a lot they can do to speak out. I also want to suggest, the United States has a law called the Women, Peace, and Security Act that the U.S. passed into law, and this may surprise all of us, but the current president actually signed it into law, but this was after a lot of hard work by peace activists and women's activists, and it was sort of under the radar, got signed into law recently. So that gives us some, this is in our law, that our Congress and our government must help women access our development aid, the negotiations, etc. So this is a very strong tool that we have. So let's talk together about possibly with ICANN, we could come up with an idea for Iraq to go to our members of Congress and push them on the question of implementation of the Women, Peace, and Security Act in Iraq, where the United States government should be able to do something important there. I've got, is it Maher? Maher. Maher.
Merci, je vais parler en français. Je pense qu'on a fait un très beau travail depuis 3 jours qui a été clôturé, qui a été finalement exorcé par le moment de ce matin-là, qui était un moment très, très touchant. Et je pense qu'on est considérés comme des défenseurs des droits de l'homme, et on est considérés des militants pour les droits de l'homme. Ça c'est vrai, c'est évident, on vient de différents pays. Mais je voudrais peut-être jeter les lumières sur une nouvelle catégorie, une nouvelle génération des défenseurs des droits de l'homme qui sont réellement les paysans, les jeunes qui sont en lutte contre la pauvreté, contre l'austérité, contre les dettes imposées par les grandes puissances, contre les politiques économiques de pillage qui s'exercent à l'égard des peuples du Sud, du monde entier, et qui ne cessent d'augmenter les inégalités de par le monde, et les inégalités surtout dans les pays du Sud. Le mouvement du RIF au Maroc, le mouvement de Camour en Tunisie, l'impunité policière, il y a pas mal de mouvements qui sont en train de donner des victimes et des jeunes persécutés par la police et parfois jugés devant des tribunaux qui ne sont pas totalement justes et équitables. Donc je pense qu'il y a une dynamique de mouvement de droits de l'homme qui s'adresse de plus en plus vers les droits économiques et sociaux et qui s'adresse de plus en plus vers une certaine justice mondiale. Le dernier prix Nobel de l'économie a été décerné il y a 2 jours à une économiste française qui travaille sur la lutte contre la pauvreté. Piketty est en train de faire un grand travail sur cette question du crise du capitalisme et du néolibéralisme, peut-être dans un contexte mondial marqué par l'injustice et marqué par l'inégalité des chances et l'inégalité des opportunités, marqué par l'injustice climatique, marqué par les fléaux de migration qui touchent presque toutes les régions du monde. Donc on est appelé quand même à avoir une certaine vision plus large qui touche non seulement les défenseurs qui travaillent dans les organisations de droits de l'homme, mais aussi les gens, entre guillemets, ordinaires qui sont dans un combat de tous les jours pour défendre leurs terres, l'accès à l'eau, l'accès à la nourriture, l'accès à l'emploi et l'accès à la santé. Il faut essayer de sortir ces gens-là de l'anonymat, il faut les faire connaître au monde entier, il faut montrer leurs photos, il faut montrer leur famille, il faut entendre leur voix. Donc peut-on peut-être espérer avoir un rêve de dire que est-il possible d'avoir à un certain moment un média international pour les le mouvement de droits de l'homme qui met en lumière tous ces combats-là, qui met en lumière toutes ces luttes-là, qui dépassent la première ligne des militants de droits de l'homme et qui est en train d'englober des centaines de milliers, des centaines de millions de jeunes qui sont dans les rues, partout dans le monde, pour défendre leur dignité, pour défendre leur liberté et pour défendre leur vie. Donc il y a un mouvement de défendre la planète, il y a un mouvement pour défendre la paix, il y a un mouvement pour défendre l'égalité sociale et la distribution des richesses entre les riches et les pauvres. Et ce mouvement-là, je pense, on est censé être dedans et on est censé appartenir à ce mouvement-là parce que réellement, on croit que les droits de l'homme sont universels et indivisibles. Merci.
Maher, this is obviously exactly what we wanted to talk about at this conference. And thank you for bringing that up. I think let's talk together about how we can show the stories of those new movements, people who are really challenging the structures, the economic structures as well. So it's a job that we have to do to get the word out and to make sure the world knows that these movements are there. And I think that's right, that the young people are doing more than we could imagine that this young generation would do. So let's work together maybe on some ideas to amplify this story, because I think you're right. I don't think it's a story that is well told to the world. So thank you. And I have Halidou next.
Merci beaucoup. I will just build to on what has been said before, especially on the support and protection of human rights defenders. We see now there are protracted crises in countries like the DRC. There are some crises in countries like Mali or Central African Republic, and emerging crises in countries like Cameroon, where I come from. We've been seeing for the last 3 years. Where I was born is in Bamenda, in the northwest province of Cameroon. People are not going to school since 3 years, and the human rights defenders have been either living in hiding in other parts of the country or refugees in countries like Nigeria. Thank you for your hospitality. But some of them have been arrested despite being refugees in that country. That brings out the question of protection of human rights defenders outside their country. And there has been some efforts by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the African Union, at the regional level to work together in order to bring about changes in the legal framework for protection of human rights defenders. And that efforts need to continue. We need to find creative ways. We've been, during the panel yesterday with Memory, we had civil society has already started doing something about networking at the regional level. But that needs more support, especially from people who have expertise, like well-established civil society organization, but also support from states, because you cannot have protection in a country without the contribution of the states. And African leaders should be called to their responsibility of protection, and also on naming those, on pointing fingers on other African leaders that are doing wrong. We don't see that enough in African countries. When something happens in my country, in Cameroon, for example, another African president doesn't stand up and speak about it. The African Union doesn't do anything. So we, as human rights defenders, we should be at the forefront and ask accountability from our leaders. And also, we are talking about the youth. Where I work for 10 years now in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we've seen the youth, they are in their 20s, in the early 30s, and they are the people who have been in the forefront for the fights against dictatorship, for fights for more rights, even at the economic, social, and cultural rights. They are demanding for access to electricity, to water in the streets. They are not formalized into well-structured human rights or development organizations. They call them mouvements citoyens, citizen movements. They are just mushrooming like after the dry season, when you have new rain, you have this mushrooming of youth group. This group needs to be helped. They need to be supported. And they do not fall into the existing framework. They are more evolved than the existing legal framework in the countries. Efforts from the UN to support legal changes should be important. And from the civil society, bringing about creative ways of protecting these people at the grassroots by educating. We believe in human rights education. The Carter Center has implemented for 3 years a very interesting program, which is the Youth Initiative, where we give space to the youth in youth houses where they will express themselves, talk about their problems, and give solutions to their problems and bring the government accountable on what the promises are. I think that is the key, where we should make everybody at the individual level a human rights defender by teaching them on what their rights are. So this is about also, and this will be the last point, experience sharing. We've seen during these 2-3 days around the table, people coming from all around the world with creative solutions that they have implemented. And it gives me hope, because what we have been saying here will be stored somewhere. It will be broadcasted online, and other people will learn about our experiences and see how we can develop creative solutions for human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to call on Hajara Telly, but first I want to ask, the issue of how to support movements keeps coming up. We've heard it throughout the 3 days, that this is not fitting within the NGO model. It's not fitting within the traditional models we're used to in human rights field. That movements are becoming more important, and you've each said it in different ways. So I would love some thoughts from anyone about what does it mean? You've already pointed to the youth houses in the Congo. That may be one way to encourage the youth. What are some other ways we can support movements? It's very difficult. These are very amorphous, leaderless mushrooms popping up. How do you harvest mushrooms in the forest? Kind of thing. So so the question is, you do no harm. That's first, right? We do no harm. So we don't want to do things that will be suppressive of movements. But it's a question. I don't have any answers to that. So I've heard it several times that it's, and of course Ramesh talked about this. So that's a very interesting question that I have in my mind. But next we're going to go to Mrs. Hajara Telly from Ghana.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I feel honored to be part of this conference. Human rights defenders, we are really suffering. But what can we do about it? Without the intervention of the Almighty, our Creator, who can easily order that this must be stopped, and it can be stopped. I want to digress that we should all put our hope in the Almighty to curb this situation of taking people's lives, innocent children. I think with that, it will be a headway to help us. But then, I want to pray, and I pray for our president, Jimmy Carter, for a longer life, for good health, and also for all of us, because without health, without life, we cannot achieve anything. So we need prayers. Whilst we are fighting for our rights and the rights of people, let us always think that the one who can make everything work is the Almighty, our Creator. Thank you. Let's say amen to all. Amen.
And as the scriptures tell us many ways, that we pray and also act. That prayer is also our strength for our action. So yes, thank you for that reminder. Claudia.
Okay, I'm going to go in very concrete proposals. One, we all depend on the special mechanisms of the UN. I don't know if you know, but the situation of the special mechanisms regarding money is very dire. We have the sexy mechanisms, human rights defenders, freedom of expression, association and demonstration. But for instance, we have a special mechanism of health, one of education. We have the groups, the treaty groups, that are really very weak. And one of the reasons is that our governments, and especially some of the very rich ones, have reduced the money for the systems. I think that a very concrete form of solidarity is ensuring that in our own governments, regardless of how human rights abuser our government are, they do give something. We should ensure that that money is really given, and it's not only budgeted, and the use of that money. That's one very concrete idea that I have been thinking about, and I put it forward here because where we are, to give concrete ideas of solidarity. The other thing, and talking about the peace buildings, peacekeepings, all these mechanisms, I think that we need to hold them accountable, not only on the participation of women, but also in their conduct. Either UN, African, or hope we won't get one for Venezuela, but at the OAS level. I think that we should give money, but also we should hold them accountable, and we have scandals going around, Me Too kind of scandals, sexual trafficking, and we should work on that. And so that's another way. So building solidarity and things that will eventually help the next one and the others. I know that we already have a lot of challenges in front, but if we really want to move a little bit further, we should do that. Then my friend Wissam, I'm sorry, I'm talking in Spanish, talked about this idea of entrepreneurs. And I have a couple of ideas on engaging companies. Here in Atlanta, we have the base of Coca-Cola, which is one of the signatures, thank you, of the Global Compact, and had addition with the voluntary principles. So why don't we make Coca-Cola a space to move forward? Let us have the companies give to a trust fund, the High Commissioner Trust Fund, so the money doesn't have any ears. We don't know. The money is in the trust fund. Who knows where the money came? And should the big transnational companies also give money to the UN? So the High Commissioner office can open offices as responses in more specific countries. So I know this is not tackling the issue of movements, but it is tackling the idea that we need these weapons as someone called it here, nonviolent ones. And let us make them through. I know we all have concerns about companies, but let us try to figure out a way forward. The money's there.
That's interesting. I don't know. Ben's next on the speaker list. You might want to talk about this, but and I think, Ben, when we were working together before, the Carter Center was involved, many years ago in the mid-90s, on strengthening the special procedures. We actually had conferences in this room about really on how can the special procedures be stronger. So this is a perennial issue, and maybe we can think optimistically that the United States government will, in the not so distant future, have a bigger commitment to the United Nations as an organization, and that our own civil society, American civil society, should push for a stronger commitment by our government to the United Nations human rights system. This is something the Carter Center has long done, and I agree with you that it plays a really crucial role, so we will note that. In terms of companies, you're right, it's a very tricky proposition to get private companies to donate to the UN or to, but I'm not opposed if it's not greenwashing or something. So this is the challenge, but great suggestions. And Ben, you're next.
Thanks so much, Karen. It was great to meet some of you in person last night and this morning. It's always a privilege to be here. My last and previous only visit was 13 years ago with Hina Gilani, who was then the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. And it's uplifting to meet this community, and also in some ways deeply depressing to find that so many of the issues are the same, perhaps even worse. In my various conversations with colleagues, one of the things which came up is how similar are the challenges that you're facing in your everyday work on the substance of human rights issues and also on protection issues, irrespective of the fact that the country contexts are very different. And that has sort of prompted me to think about the systemic nature of the problems that we're facing. And speaking particularly to President Carter's question to us, it seems to me that there are, if one goes to a very, very macro level, from a very systemic level, one can suggest that there are two fundamental challenges that we're facing. One is that there is a tremendous breakdown in the political consensus at the topmost level of governments on human rights as a basis for governance. One can argue that consensus existed in a fairly vigorous way in the post-Second World War years. It fluctuated up and down, but even throughout the Cold War, it was still pretty vigorous. And one can argue that it's really been diluted and weakened. And the second major fault line that I see, and perhaps a more complex and even more dangerous one, is a breakdown in what I think of as a popular consensus, the consensus amongst people of that there are human rights and that the governance, the world in which they are governed, we are governed as people, should be framed by human rights. And over lunch we were talking about Agenda 2030, this concept, leave no one behind. It's a powerful concept, an elegant one, but it prompts one also to think about the populations who are ahead and who are afraid that those coming from behind might overtake them, that it's a zero sum. So one has this breakdown of popular consensus. I don't want my government to give more to somebody else because what does that mean for me? I think the combination of these two breakdowns of consensus is disastrous. It's disastrous certainly for individual rights and individual countries at a time when we're just coming off the General Assembly and the Climate Change Summit, at a time when governments are recognizing, most governments are recognizing fully the challenges of climate change and the fact that we are all in this together. What I think is ironic and actually incoherent in governance is that you have on the one hand, on the left hand, saying we are all in this together, we have to tackle climate change together. On the other hand, tackling climate change cannot succeed tackling climate change is more even than technological changes. It's about people's lives. It's about changes to how all of us live our lives, changes to consumption, to transport, to employment, to education, to land rights. There are so many changes implied by addressing climate change that if you don't manage how those changes affect people, we will have chaos. And in chaos, you cannot address climate change. To manage people in a way that's healthy and supportive, you need a framework which is human rights, or most obviously human rights. So you have an incoherence with the world saying we need to be all in this together. We need political consensus to address climate change, but we lack the political consensus on human rights, which will makes the first consensus essential. And the same goes for popular consensus. My suggestion is then, from a very macro level, that there be a major push to try to rebuild these two areas of consensus. One could talk for hours and weeks about what that actually means, and it could become very vague and not very practical. But to give just one practical example, if one were to take the 193 odd heads of government or heads of state and appeal very vigorously to those of them who are amenable, that they have a leadership role, that their agendas can be furthered by trying to rebuild this consensus. And certainly they may each have political concerns as to regards to certain human rights at certain moments domestically, but there is a bigger cause, and rebuilding that consensus, both the political one and the popular one, is a cause that's worth fighting for. I think this could be maybe an area amongst others for us to push on. Thank you.
Thank you. And at some point, we should talk about what's happening with the various institutions inside the UN human rights system, because I do think that that needs addressing as well. Both funding, but a lot of good has happened with the UPR. There has been progress in some ways institutionally, but as Claudia said, the bodies are underfunded, they're not properly staffed, et cetera. So that's a whole conversation that we could also have. And I have Ramesh next.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to be very brief about this is 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi. And being a Gandhian organization, we thought that this is our responsibility to take this challenge and to globalize the Gandhi, and especially the messages of Gandhi regarding the peace and justice and dignity, etc. So from this 2nd October 2019, we have already started a foot march, and this foot march is actually going to cross over various countries in Middle East, then in Balkans, in Caucasus, in Europe, and reaching to Geneva on next 2nd October 2020. The main idea behind this march is to talk about the ethics and justice. The ethics, because the core area of ethics is somewhere it's missing, what we felt with our own experiences. And definitely, when we talk about the ethics, we would like also to address the issues of justice and hope and dignity, etc., which actually meant a lot for millions of poor people in these countries, actually. So the one message, there are a lot of key issues which we are bringing towards Geneva. But one idea is to talk about, because this is the year when UN is also, they have SDGs, Sustainable Development Goal, and it's a mathematical matrix of 169 indicators and this and that. But it's very mathematical, and sometimes it's highly institution-centric. So the component of people is missing in the entire debate. So that's how the one idea is to challenge those kind of a mathematical or mathematical indicators, and to talk, to change the narratives, to change the ideas of addressing these issues in a more community-centric approach rather than an institution-centric approach. So one idea which we are bringing to take it to Geneva is to request, to motivate, to inspire the UN institutions to declare a decade of peace. a decade of peace, 2020 to 2030, because this is the year where they have to address a lot of issues which directly related with the violence or structural violence on the ground. So apart from many other ideas, the one slogan which actually we are taking along with us, and it's a message of hope, that one people, one planet. Because we are living in the time of perfect crisis. So if we really want to address the perfect crisis, this is the high time for us to talk about one people, one planet. Thank you.
Perfect. Did you say October 2nd, 2020, they'll reach Geneva?
Yeah, so yes. So actually, this is a one-year march. So 25th September, exactly the 25th of September, we'll reach Geneva. And then we'll be there for a week, almost like a week. And we actually trying to organize various smaller or bigger discussions around the justice, peace, dignity, etc. Climate justice is one of the core area. A lot of young people are also coming from all different places. So we'll be around 5,000 people in Geneva. Only 50 people we are marching to different countries because of the logistical issues.
And they're marching now?
Yes, the march has already started from 2nd of October. So right now we are in India. I mean, the initial thought was to cross over Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. But we know that because of all political tensions, the borders are sealed. So we are walking up to next 3 months in India. Then we'll start our march from Iran onwards.
Now that's dedication.
Thank you. And we need a solidarity.
Okay.
So that's the purpose of one of my statement, that we need a lot of solidarity, support, your involvement, your leadership. So please join with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you.
We can certainly shed light on what's happening. And this idea of a decade of peace, 2020 to 2030, is a wonderful idea.
So
yeah.
can I add just one more thing? So along with the whole this idea, so what should be the larger framework of international peace of decade? Because the one declaration is not enough. So we need some kind of a solid action. And there are some thoughts on what should be the solid action in this international peace of decade. So one idea is to inspire, especially those countries who are tough, who are actually facing a lot of direct or structural violence, to set up a Ministry of Peace. And this is the one idea which actually we keep bringing in the political discourse in India. And we try to address this issue because we are celebrating 150 years of Gandhi in India, and we don't have Ministry of Peace. So we are spending a huge amount of money on just opposite side. So there are a lot of ideas, but this is the one idea behind. Thank you.
And Wassam, I see your placard up, but I'm going to let everyone else who hasn't spoken yet speak, and then we'll come back to you. And we've got Phil.
Thank you very much. So I hope these comments are taken in a spirit of being constructive and not unduly critical. But I have two broad points I want to make. The first is I think that we need to be more forthright in demanding that our allies actually put human rights defenders up front and actually show solidarity and don't sacrifice human rights defenders on the altar, sometimes literally, of perceived economic, political and security interests. And I'll take advantage of having representatives who I know and like well from the UN and also consuls general from states to make two remarks directed at them. For the UN, it's very clear that they are not putting human rights defenders up front. Human rights is not an equal and independent pillar with security and development, and it needs to be. The UN needs to develop and implement a system-wide policy committing all organs and agencies of the organisation to put human rights defenders up front. And if you take the situation in Burundi as an example, we have the UNDP very significant and involved in Burundi, and we had the Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights with a small presence in Burundi. OHCHR was kicked out of the country. Independent experts mandated by the Human Rights Council were designated as persona non grata. And the response of UNDP was silence because they wanted to maintain a political dialogue. So rather than the organisation acting as a whole and using its significant development leverage to promote human rights outcomes, it was prepared to sacrifice human rights and human rights defenders on the altar of what it perceived to be the importance of political dialogue. And it hasn't paid in the long term. I think also, having some states in the room, I'll direct some remarks to them. States like Norway, states like Switzerland are key diplomatic and financial partners of ISHR, of many human rights defender organisations in this room. But they too are guilty too often of sacrificing human rights defenders on the altar of perceived political and economic interests. Norway is very strong thematically on human rights defenders and on women's rights, but doesn't lead a single country resolution at the Human Rights Council in respect of countries where human rights defenders are under threat or attack. Switzerland distinguished itself at the last Human Rights Council session by failing to sign a statement signed by many other states calling for the release of women human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia from arbitrary detention, many of whom have been tortured. It's no coincidence that there is a lot of Saudi oil money, which is banked in my town of Geneva. So we need, I think, to be more forthright in identifying and calling out those interests and demanding consistency and demanding solidarity from those who should be our allies. The second point is that, and it's been a bit of a recurring theme, I think sectorally we need to get better at communications. I watched the video and it's extraordinarily powerful and it appropriately memorialises those who've sacrificed enormously for human rights. But I must say, after watching it, I felt a sense of hopelessness and despair. And I'm not sure that that's what we want to be evoking in people. I think what we want to be evoking in audiences is a sense of hope and of motivation, or at least a good sense of who is responsible, who are the perpetrators that need to be held accountable, and what is the action that I can take in order to promote accountability. So I think sectorally we need to become more sophisticated and to show more solidarity in terms of these hope-based and values-based communications and concrete calls to action.
Good. We don't mind constructive criticism at all. That's why we're here. And those are all really good suggestions. And Phil, I think I hear you're volunteering for something again. What happened? We talked about this idea that I have about a scorecard. And, the thing is, I think it would be really important if the governments that talk about human rights and have very good rhetoric for human rights were graded on how they deliver. Wouldn't that be pretty interesting? Anyway, just suggesting it. I'm going to keep floating it until some organization says, that's brilliant, we'll do it. But Carter Center would be happy to collaborate with others on it, I think, at least to talk about it. And in terms of the UN, again, on the same question of the various institutions within the UN system, I do think we should talk more about what's happening in Geneva, what's happening in New York, what can we do? Because I know there are great people. I mean, Ben and Andrew Gilmore is always talking about reprisals. He's done some great work on that. But system-wide, it's very difficult. Governments are trying to maintain their open doors with the governments where they're hosted. We know that. So is the UNDP. We know that. But I also know that, President Carter, sometimes he'll talk about how when he was president of the United States, right, the most powerful country in the world during the Cold War along with the Soviet Union, he actually made progress on human rights because he really believed in it. He would talk to the Soviets or Argentina that was an ally and push them and say, you should do this. And there was a kind of They knew that he felt deeply, and so things happened. So I think that getting that deep feeling and commitment by governments, and I'm sure our friends from the various consulates who are here will take that message back, I'm sure. Hello. We'll bring those messages back. But thank you for being frank. And we have Halima Jibril.
Distinguished colleagues, good afternoon. My name is Halima Jibril. I represent the Federation of Muslim Women's Associations in Nigeria, Form 1. I want to thank the Carter Center for this opportunity. I speak as a beneficiary and implementer of the Tostan training facilitated by the Carter Center in July 2019. There are already over 184 beneficiaries of this training from Nigeria and Ghana. In Nigeria, between July and September, my organization has reached out with the message of human rights to 3,000 Muslim youth and women. We believe that awareness, knowledge, and practice of human rights among citizens can prevent clashes and conflicts. We therefore urge the Carter Center to give more support to Tostan for these trainings so that we in turn can reach out to more people, especially organizations that are in our networks. Conflicts have social and economic costs. According to the Institute for Peace, conflicts cost us globally over $14 million every year, and the US has a larger share of that bill. So it is in our collective interest as nations, as human rights defenders, that we take actions and support institutions that can help us to prevent these conflicts. Finally, permit me to observe that all over the world, Muslims feel threatened mainly because of the smear campaign against them, especially in the Western media. Human rights are undermined if a religion is used to label criminals. A criminal is a criminal, whether a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, or whatever his religion. We therefore urge His Excellency President Carter to lend his voice to condemn these smear campaigns, and we also call for solidarity to condemn the campaigns and to change the trend. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. We will communicate that to him. And the Carter Center has had a program on Islamophobia, actually, that I can share with you. But I think your point that that a criminal is a criminal no matter their religion, and to emphasize the religion has these devastating impacts. So that's very important. And we're actually coming up to the break now. So I just want to call on Mariana before we go to break, and then we'll have a 30-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will try to be brief, and I will try to answer first the question that you asked, Karen, how do you support movements? This is something that we are trying to learn about at the Fund for Global Human Rights. And there are four things that you do, four concrete and actually difficult things. And the first thing is you listen. And I'll illustrate this with an example. I visited a women's group in a country that I won't mention not so long ago. And I visited with another women's group. The women's group we visited was a movement. It was very local. It was not registered. It was women that made their living from gathering, harvesting in public forests. And the women's group from the capital came and wanted to talk about violence against women. The women's group that was local and that was harvesting in the forest said, you know, actually, when we make a living, we don't have a problem with violence against women. Our problem is that the local officials won't give us access to the forests. And this takes away our living. And the group from the capital kept saying, but what about violence against women? And it was actually a longer conversation, because there was one of the group, both of them were talking about human rights, but there was no real listening happening to those who were supposed to be the beneficiaries of this action, which were the local women's movement. So the first thing you do is you listen. And if the answer is not what you thought it was, then you listen to that too. You don't persist. The second thing you do is you accept that there's going to be a certain amount of risk. And again, I'll talk about an example. I was working with a bilateral donor at some point implementing a granting program with populations that were criminalized in the country we were working in. These were LGBTI populations. And the bilateral donor required auditing and required receipts for every single expense that was made. This was just not going to be possible. The bilateral donor said, well, we care very much about corruption in our country. We need to be able to document to our parliament that this money has been used appropriately. And that's an understandable concern. But if you're in a country where it's criminal to be who you are, you cannot register your organization and you can't call an auditing firm saying, come and look at my expenses. So there has to be some acceptance of risk if you want to fund what's actually necessary in that context. You also accompany, and we've talked here about solidarity expressed through finances and solidarity expressed through moral accompaniment. And I think both are incredibly important. It's actually easy to write a check. I mean, this is something all of us always need money for the work, and even space to give moral support costs money because it's time. But it's a lot harder to stay with your partners through times when things seem like they're very hopeless. So accompaniment is incredibly important. And the example I would bring up is Berta Cáceres. We saw her name, her work on the video before. When she was killed, we supported her group. Before she was killed, we support the group that she founded now too. We also support the push for justice in her case. And this is the time of it, and that's taking time. It's taking a lot of time. But solidarity means following through on that process, even when a particular line of work is shut down. And the last thing I would say is really important is asking the hard questions. Movements are not a panacea. Movements carry the distortions that society carry as a whole. So, you know, when you're working in partnership with a movement where all you ever talk to are people from the dominant or powerful ethnicity, or all you ever get to meet are men, or all you ever get to meet are any other group that is in a position of privilege, you ask, why is that? Why are we only seeing the people who are in power here? You don't assume something is wrong, but you ask the question and you assume that there's going to be respect enough to have a frank conversation. I was going to make a comment as well about the crisis, the popular, but I have time? Okay. So I'm going to try to be concise and also offer this in the spirit of maybe constructive criticism. This is actually a personal crisis. I feel this crisis of the human rights framework. Personally, this is my time. I never thought I would question this. I agree with Ben that we have to push for reestablishing the legitimacy of this framework. But as we do so, we also have to accept that part of it may have played out its time. A lot of the problems we've been talking about actually link directly to some of the elements of the human rights framework that no longer feel true. Like the centering the nation state. If we're talking about human rights defenders in another country and we can only look at the actor as the nation state, there is a problem here. I mean, I think it can be solved within the human rights framework, but we need to put it on the table. Sovereignty is not, sovereignty is used as an excuse to violate human rights. The other issue is this, I teach human rights, right? We teach the students that there is the state as the duty bearer, and there is the individual as the rights holder. But what we're talking about are situations where it's not just individuals that are under threat. The environmental breakdown, the environmental crisis, this is about all of us together. And so we have to look at the human rights system and how we can use it in a way that's not just centering the individual. There's the element of, again, comes from the human rights system itself. I remember studying this. It doesn't matter what economic setup you have. Human rights are, independent of the economic system. The way we have set up capitalism to only count benefits that are monetary is damaging to human rights. We are not counting welfare. We're not counting well-being. And maybe this is a challenge to capitalism itself. It's certainly a challenge to only counting benefits that are monetary. If we're not thinking about the cost of production or the cost of doing business the way we're currently doing business, if we're not passing that on to the corporations, we can't use the system. So that's...
I'm sorry, Mariana, but I think you just volunteered for a roundtable. Because last year, our forum was on that topic, and Dr. Radhika Balakrishnan, who is an economist, who's working on this exactly, on what is the economy for, okay? So this is a crisis for human rights, and we would like to talk more about it, so I'm going to send you an email and ask you to join a roundtable to see how we can have a breakthrough in this, because, everything is, the table is being thrown up in the air because of climate change. We've talked about that, Wissam mentioned yesterday. There's actually this moment of creative possibility, right? Yeah. So let's talk about that more, and it sounds like a great roundtable. Okay, so now we're going to a break, and just a couple of announcements. Just one. Just to remind everyone and our online audience, and those of you here, is that you, Christy, in the back? Christy York-Wooten, who will be moderating our conversations tomorrow night here at 7 o'clock here in this room, featuring three of our guests here, Senator Hafida Ben-Shahida, Memory Bandera, and Claudia Samoya. Will be featured in that discussion. It's going to be fantastic. So, and our moderator is here. So, online audience watch, and any of you who are here still in town, please join us. And now we'll have a break, and we'll be back here at.
No, we're starting at 3:45.
3:45, and President Carter's coming for that. So please be in your chairs a couple minutes early.